Although this is an extremely radical concept, the philosophy of dieting is fundamentally flawed and frankly needs to be abolished. The very mention of the word makes me reach for my holster. The idea of doing something for a fixed period of time, in this particular case specifically to lose weight, is simply crass. What are we supposed to do after that fixed period of time? Effectively, you have three options: continue indefinitely, return to the eating habits that you were doing before the diet, or lastly, something completely different. The chances are you were completely miserable when you were on your diet, and therefore the first option, which is to continue indefinitely, is simply not viable. And that of course explains why the vast majority of diets, which are almost always calorie restricted diets, fail in the long term. And of course, if you go back to what you were doing before, and that is what got you into trouble in the first place, then you will only end up in the same place. In the immortal words of Albert Einstein, the definition of insanity is doing the same things over and over again and expecting different results. And finally, if you choose to do something else, what exactly are you going to do? And this brings us to the whole point of the Nysteia Formula. The Nysteia Formula is completely different in that it is not a diet. A diet implies a restriction of food in one form or another, and of course there are a huge number of different diets, but they are largely variations on the same theme, and that is to calorie restrict. However, there are also lots of fad diets. So you have things like low carbohydrate, high fat, or high protein, low fat, or high carbohydrate, high protein, or low protein, high fat. You name it, it exists. The fact that there are so many different diets tells you something fundamental, and that is the people who thought of them don't actually understand how the human body works, and in the long term, none of them actually work. Importantly, they all introduce a lot of bad psychology around our relationship with food, and this is mainly centered on always having to work out what you can and cannot have, and then how much of it you are allowed. And equally importantly, any attempt at getting you to lose weight, be that a diet, surgery, exercise, or pre-prepared meals, will fail in the long term unless you address insulin resistance, which is the underlying problem in obesity. The Nysteia Formula is the only thing we know that specifically addresses insulin resistance. The wonderful thing about the Nysteia Formula, and in particular the intermittent fasting element, is that you are really not required to restrict anything at all, with one exception, and that is refined carbohydrate. You are certainly not required to restrict the volume of food, because in fact in your 6-hour feeding window it is going to be difficult for you to eat more than you actually need. Your sense of satiety during this period will automatically limit the intake to the requisite amount. So in this respect, it is definitely not a diet. It is a method of eating.